The very first thing that really surprised me was the lack of resources for the caregivers. There's a million resources out there for stroke survivors, the care of stroke, but really nothing for the caregiver. And if it is something, it's usually maybe one chapter in a book or maybe a couple paragraphs. So very, very limited. I think the another gap was how to build a life post-stroke. There's your life before the stroke and there's your life after the stroke. And what one physician had told me was, when someone has a stroke, he now has two patients, the stroke patient and the caregiver, because they don't always take care of themselves. And then really the third thing was really how to balance my needs with my husband's. I spent so much energy the first year, especially helping him and making sure he was safe and doing everything, that I kind of forgot about me and my health deteriorated. And so that was a challenge. Um, well, I think the most important thing is, of course, to keep your loved ones safe, but not at your own expense. You can slow because you're so overwhelmed with everything, you could actually slow their progress by doing too much for them. I think they need to know what to expect physically, emotionally, and spiritually of what they're going to experience and what the stroke patient is going to visit. I had no idea that my husband would sleep 12 to 18 hours a day. No one had told me that. I wasn't prepared that he would get angry at me all the time. So things like that, and really how to handle that. And I think then really how others can help them. The number one thing people say when they hear your husband has had a stroke is, what can I do? How can I help? Well, the only thing you really want is for to turn back time. And unfortunately, no one can do that. But there are things that people can do at different stages. And, in my book, I have that just a section of little things that they can do because you don't know. The one thing I tell people all the time is please don't bring us casseroles. Um, it's like, oh, but really, it's just knowing that there are others out there that help and that they're not alone, that there is a resource now available to them. Well, I think the number one thing that I missed was, or I would have really helped me, is to talk to someone that that was in my same shoes, that was a caregiver, that quote unquote gets it, that would just let me vent without saying, oh, but he's doing so well and he survived and he looks great, but just would let me vent and share my frustrations and my grief, because that's really the thing you're going to go through. It's a grief of, thank goodness you still have your loved one, but the grief is you've lost a lifestyle, you've lost a partner, you've lost your livelihood, and you don't really know what what to expect or if you're going to survive that. So I think talking to other caregivers would have helped immensely, and then I think you know uh, having some resources. When I was in the intensive care unit and I was Googling, different things for caregivers, I just really couldn't find anything, or it just was very, very difficult. And so they would come in and say, do you have any questions? What can we do to help you? And I just didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know is basically it. And it would have been really nice to have someone come in and say, this is kind of what you're going to what to expect. Currently I go to a hospital once a week and meet with the new family members of stroke patients, and we don't talk medical, we don't talk you know what he can do or he can't do type of thing. I go directly to the caregiver and it's like, okay, did you sleep last night? When's the last time you left the room? How have you eaten? Those kind of things. And then, okay, what's keeping you awake at night? And it's usually the what ifs. Okay, so what if he comes home and he's never able to walk? You know, he took care of the finances. What if I have to do that? How am I going to do that? Those what ifs will actually drive the caregiver crazy, because as soon as you saw one, a new one pops in. It's just like a never ending type of thing. So I think those are kind of the things I felt. Well, it really started in a chair in the ICU room. As a nurse, I was working as a case manager full time from home, and I sat in that chair and I realized that in all the years I was a health professional, I thought that I was aware of the caregiver, and I'd always ask, if you have questions, can I support you anyway? But I had not a clue. And I realized then that sitting in that chair, I was in a whole different world that I never expected to be in. Then I started to kind of Google, like, okay, how do I navigate this? How do I do this? And I realized there really wasn't anything there for me. There weren't any support groups that I could call, or anything like that. And it almost felt selfish to ask for support for myself when my husband was having a stroke. I didn't have the stroke, so why should I be thought of? So what I did was, I started off by journaling everything I had gone through. I wrote the first book just really to get information out there to caregivers of what they can kind of expect, and kind of guide them through those years. Not only the medical aspects, like what to ask the doctor when, but how to prepare things, what they can experience or what they will experience, type of thing. And then it just kind of snowballed after that. I started talking to people in support groups. I um, spent time giving talks, that sort of thing. And I realized there was a huge, huge gap in that caregiver role. And so Stroke Caregiver Connection really was set up to provide education, support, but just to help other caregivers. The number one purpose is, although they're never by themselves, they're never alone, they are lonely. And I wanted them to have a place that they could come to, that they would feel supported, they would not be judged, they would get resources they need, they could cry with someone, they can laugh with someone. On those days when they want to throw in the towel, there's a resource that says, okay, you can throw in the towel, but you got to pick it back up. Here's how we're going to do it together. So just that support. I just didn't want any other woman or man to experience what I experienced. I think, I thought a lot about this after you posed that question. And I think the thing I want them to remember is, one, that they matter. What they do matters. It may be different than anything they've ever done in their life, but what they do matters, and that they're not alone, and that the role of the caregiver is vital to the overall health of the stroke patient. They're the ones that make sure the medicine gets taken. They're the ones that get them to their appointments. They're the ones that identify early if there's a problem. And what they do really does matter. And then they can have a joy-filled life. That after the crisis is over, you will being a caregiver is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And, as time progresses, you'll find ways to find joy back in your life and find purpose for yourself and for your loved one. And so it doesn't have to be the end of a lifestyle, but it can really be the start of something new and supported and loving, if you have the support and the resources available to you.